Welcome to the Austin Chronicle May 2021 election forums. I'm Mike Clark-Madison, news editor and columnist at the Austin Chronicle. And I'll be moderating discussions with advocates for and against some of the propositions that are on the ballot for this special city election. There are 8 in total, propositions A through H. And all but one are citizen initiatives that were placed on the ballot after their supporters gathered signatures from at least 20,000 Austin voters. I'll be asking questions on behalf of the Chronicle editorial board and our readers. The Chronicle's own endorsements will be appearing in our April 16th issue, just in time for early voting, which runs April 19th through 27th. Election day is Saturday, May 1st. You can find out everything you need to know before you go to the polls at austinchronicle.com/elections. For this session, we're taking a look at Proposition F, and I'll read you that ballot language right now. Proposition F. Shall the city charter be amended to change the form of city government from council manager to strong mayor council, which will eliminate the position of professional city manager and designate an elected mayor as the chief administrative and executive officer of the city with veto power over all legislation, which includes the budget, and with sole authority to hire and fire most department heads and direct staff, and with no articulated or stated charter authority to require the mayor to implement council decisions. So that is the ballot language. In short, strong mayor. You've probably heard those 2 words already in this election cycle, but that's what we're talking about here. Now, I'll let the advocates introduce themselves. On the pro side, for strong mayor, for Proposition F, we have Allison.
Thanks very much for having me.
And Nelson Linder.
Good morning, and thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And then against Proposition F, we have Nico Ramsey.
Morning, thank you.
And Emily Timm.
Good morning. Thank you for having me this morning.
All right. So I'm going to start with an opening segment here with the pro advocates, and to let the viewers know, the group that has put this on the ballot, called Austinites for Progressive Reform, I don't know what APR stood for, sorry, which is led by Mr. Allison, so I will ask him to start. So, Andrew, why are we doing this?
Thanks, Mike, and thanks very much for hosting all of us this morning. Prop F is about letting voters and not politicians decide who leads our city government. We are one of the few large cities in the country where an unelected city manager still oversees our government. And that means drafting the budget, overseeing the police, overseeing transportation, planning, and so many other city services. Instead, we could have a system with voters in charge, with a structure that is very familiar to all of us. 2 branches of government, co-equal to each other, a legislative branch, the council, an executive branch, the mayor, both independent with separation of powers, no branch more superior than the other, with checks and balances between the 2, and critically, both branches democratically accountable to the people. And that is the key difference between the system that we do have and the system that we could have, voters choosing who leads our city. Now, opponents would argue that the veto power is somehow disqualifying in this proposal, but the veto power can be overridden with a simple 2/3 vote of the council. So the council will have the final say over all legislation and the budget. Every big city in the country with this system has a veto power, and the council takes 2/3 votes all the time. Now, opponents have also argued that this is somehow a concentration of power, but this power exists today. We have a chief executive in the city. That is the city manager. They are not elected. The question is not about creating new powers. The question is about who should wield the power that already exists. Should it be somebody who is unelected or somebody who we get to choose? And in this conversation, we should listen to every other argument that opponents are going to make, because at the end of the day, they all boil down to Austin voters cannot be trusted. But is that what we really believe? And is that the kind of government that we want to have? Prop F puts more power in the hands of the people. And with our democracy under attack, that's a very good thing. And with the rest of our time, Nelson, take it away.
Yes.
Thank you. Am I on okay? Let's see here. Yeah. First, good morning again. Of course, I concur. Listen, when I first got involved here, we were talking about the Austin city government. Can we make this government better? Are we addressing all of our issues? And the question was no. I've been doing this for 30 years. There are disparities all across this city. In time of emergencies, people stutter instead of reacting because they don't know what to do because of leadership. We need a person who's elected as the chief executive in the city so we can make quick, responsible decisions in time of emergencies. We're seeing that right now. And frankly, when you talk about constitutional power, power should reside in the voters. That's what democracy is. I believe that if you educate voters with proper information, let them read it themselves, make no conclusion, they'll see it's okay to question government. It's okay to put these critical issues before the whole populace and make good decisions. So I think that Prop F does that. I don't see this thing about a strong man or constitutional power. What I see is a city that's evolving because of its population, its issues, and you're going to have to elect people who want to be legislators. I'd love to be, frankly, a legislator. I like writing legislation. So why is the mayor doing all the talking about critical issues? You say you have critical power, but you're not. If you have equal power, why aren't you addressing these very same issues? Why does the mayor take a hit when there's a crisis? Because we say you have equal power. Well, that's not true. We want a system that's responsive, that gets all the input. If you got a debate to come up with a veto as a council member, then you can do so. Why be afraid of that? I would love to have the opportunity. But you got to talk to each other to make sure there are balance of powers. And I believe in this system, which is a federal system, you're going to have balance of power. And also, this city with all of its resources and all of its national accolades, we have inequities going out of this world. Median income disparities, racial disparities in income. Those things are okay. In a democracy, everybody should benefit. And I believe in the voters themselves, not an elected council that has their own self-interest as if they're afraid of having a debate. Let's have a debate, let's have an election, and let's choose the best particular model. And I believe we can do that and expand democracy and make this a better city that's more responsive to everybody, not just a few districts, but to the entire city.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Linder, and your timing is impeccable. I should also note that Mr. Linder is the president of the Austin chapter of the NAACP, for those of you who don't know who he is. And yes, he has been an active member of public life in Austin for many, many years. All right, moving over to the other side. We have an organized opposition to Proposition F that is being led by a number of people. Prominent among them are labor groups, but there are other advocates that are also involved in this. And I am going to start with Nico. Is that okay? Or should I start with Emily? I should start with Emily.
Yes, please.
Okay, I will start with Emily.
Great.
Emily Timm, go.
Thank you. Again, my name is Emily Timm. I am the Executive Director of Workers Defense Action Fund, a membership-based organization working with low-wage workers, immigrant workers, and advocating for better working conditions in Austin. I also am speaking on behalf of a coalition known as By the People, which is made up of a broad range of organizations, including community groups like ours, labor unions, environmental organizations, criminal justice advocates, and neighborhood leaders. So together, we are a wide array of organizations who represent diverse constituencies throughout the city and advocate on a wide range of issues. But we are all united by our belief that a strong mayor system in Austin, as proposed by Prop F, will concentrate too much power in the hands of one individual who will likely always be most accountable to wealthy donors. Prop F will transform our local government to a strong mayor system, with the mayor holding the power to unilaterally determine what gets done and what doesn't at City Hall. The strong mayor will be able to veto any action by City Council, which could only be overturned by a supermajority vote of council. Furthermore, as a city administrator, the mayor would have the direct control of the budget and the ability to make political appointments in city departments and direct staff as they wish, regardless of the will of the council at large. In effect, if the mayor doesn't want it to happen, it's not going to happen. Putting more power in the hands of a single individual will undermine people of color and working people by diminishing the voices of the city council members who represent our diverse communities. Our government should represent the experiences of all citizens, not just one individual and the individuals who helped to elect them. So switching to a strong mayor form, we believe would give corporate interests and big tech companies too much power and influence, that they would be able to use their bigger donations in a citywide election to have a friendly mayor with more powers to stop new rules that they don't like. So our organization, along with others in our coalition, supported the move to a geographically representative council in 2014. We've seen how a council that is more accountable to diverse parts of the city has passed a long list of policies that are supported by and responsive to the needs of less powerful groups. And this is in contrast to when all council members were elected at large before that. We can mention paid sick leave, fair chance hiring, construction standards, a greater investment in affordable housing, policies to reduce racial disparities in policing, and support for renter organizing. All of these are initiatives that are driven by a council that is responsive to the needs of their residents and all residents of the city, not just a more elite, wealthy donor class. Prop F will dismantle these gains, and every community conversation with a council member will start with, well, where is the mayor on this? Prop F will take away the gains that have been made with our 10-1 system over the years. So let's be clear, this is not a progressive democratic reform, this is a power grab. The other propositions on the ballot, whether their merits as democratic reforms, don't change that. A strong mayor system will concentrate too much power in the hands of one individual who will be the least accountable to people of color, working people, and their families. We urge Austinites to vote no on Proposition F. And with any remaining time, I'll let Nico introduce himself.
Nico, you got like a minute or so.
Awesome. Well, really and truly, I reiterate everything Emily just said. I come from another coalition called Austin for All People, which is a volunteer group that opposes Prop F and believes our 10-1 system works. Really, to add on to what Emily said, you know, it's a good thing that our city manager is not elected and that we have elected officials that we put into office pick this person, because this person needs to know how to run a $4.2 billion enterprise and over 12,000 employees. So we run the risk of somebody who doesn't even know how to run a city getting in and running our city should this amendment pass.
All right. Okay, so there's the statements for and against Proposition F. From here, I'm going to alternate asking questions between the sides, but I'm also going to give each side an opportunity to respond to the other side. So it will be a lot back and forth, and I'll try to keep it, civil, but also moving along, and, expect a couple minutes on each question. And to start with Andrew, and pros for Proposition F. And I'm going to ask this in the friendliest possible way. Who are you? And why did you decide that now was the time to launch what is ultimately, it's not a small task to get a citizen initiative on the ballot. So where is the impetus for this coming from?
Sure. Well, I'll certainly be happy to introduce myself a bit more, but I want to highlight that this campaign is led by 100 members of the leadership committee. Co-chairs of that committee include Nelson and many other people who are well known in our community and active in terms of moving our city forward. People from all across the city have come together to support this campaign, and the reforms were not written by one person in a room. The reforms were written by 15 people with ideological differences who came together to advance our democracy. I'll tell you what brought me to this work. I think everybody has their own reason for why they support democracy reform in the city. For me, 21 years ago, my first ever vote in a presidential election, I was 18 years old. I voted for the person who ended up getting the most votes and lost that election. And it was an introduction to me in how undemocratic our systems of government can be. I went on to work for John Kerry's campaign on the speechwriting team and witnessed this again up close, state by state voter disenfranchisement happening in Texas and other places. Went on to work for the Brennan Center for Justice, a leading democracy organization in the country that fights for the right to vote. And then, of course, witnessing over the last 10 years, as I led a company here in Austin that supported small businesses around the country, the dismantling or attempted dismantling of our democracy, beginning with gerrymandering in 2011, the Voter Rights Act decision by the Supreme Court in 2013, voter ID that came up after that, all the efforts to sabotage our postal service and the rest. Democracy reform is critical for us right now. And I don't know how we get through the next decade in America without ensuring that everybody has a right to vote and access to the ballot. And if we're not going to get help from the state, then the cities of Texas can step up and increase voter turnout using every power in their toolbox to do so. And that is what our reforms are all about.
All right. Nelson, is there anything you want to add?
Sure. NAACP started here in 1919. And for the past 100 years, we worked to create a city that responds to all citizens. We led the 10-1 coalition. Let that be very, very clear, because we thought that everybody should have their own district and our representation. But it can't stop there, because racial disparities, housing, are still sitting there larger than ever. So I would challenge the notion that we've been effective. We have not been effective. We have to grow and address these issues as we evolve. The housing crisis, the police issue. It took the death of George Floyd to wake people up. We've had killings since 2001. What's been happening? You see, so effective government starts at home. You have to be responsive. You have to communicate and build viable coalitions, as we did during 10-1, to address these issues. And by the way, we are a civil rights organization. We deal with everybody. I know about workers' defense and other people as well. But when you talk about disparities and opportunities in this city racially, they are not here as they should be. And so I think if we have effective government where a person can make a decision based on communication, because nobody is making decisions in a cave, by the way. They're talking to other people who are elected officials to build coalitions to get things done. And I believe there should be an accountability. We're not making progress on certain key issues. So why do we keep electing the same people? Because we got to sit at the table. The community doesn't have a seat at the table. Those disparities are still there. I want to see a city where everybody benefits. And I believe to do that, you need effective governance with a chief executive that we elect. That's what democracy is. Am I afraid? Of course not. Everything is an investment, but you minimize the risk by having checks and balances.
All right. So now I'm going to ask Emily and Nico if they want to respond to that, and then ask Emily and Nico a question of their own. So Emily.
I'd like to respond. So, Mr. Linder, I want to thank you for your leadership on putting in place the geographically elected 10-1 system in our city. That has been a critical change. With Workers' Defense, we have done work both before that system was in place and after that system was in place. And we have seen how having geographically elected city council members who are accountable to specific constituencies and specific parts of the city that previously were really overlooked when everyone was elected at large, has made a critical difference in making sure that those issues that affect those communities and those voices are being heard at city council. Now, we know that in a citywide election, Austin still faces deep disparities, as you alluded to, in participation in elections. If you look at a map of the city of Austin and who actually participates in a citywide election, you see a huge divide. You see a wealthy, affluent West Austin that will turn out in a citywide election, and you see an eastern crescent of the city that still is low. Now, that section of the city is still electing their council members, and so those voices are being heard, but those voices will always be minimized in our current city, in a citywide election. And so the mayor concentrating so much power in the hands of the mayor is actually putting more hands in the power of the individual who's going to be least accountable to communities of color and working class communities in our city. And that is our challenge. If we were operating in a perfect world, that might not be a concern. And we are doing the hard work every year to expand the electorate, particularly among people of color and working class families in Austin. But that reality is something that we can't ignore. And I think you know that very well.
All right. I'd like to say hello to the baby in the background.
Oh, I apologize. I have small people who have strong opinions.
No worries. No worries. Nico, just any further, anything to add to that?
I don't. That was perfect. Thank you, Emily.
All right. So my question to Emily and Nico is, what Andrew Nelson are talking about here, they're centering this very much in, the individual voter, the opportunity to expand the democratic power of the individual voter. And the read that from that perspective of the opposition would be, these are special interest groups that have been able to lobby the council to get their pet projects or their pet initiatives done. And that's why they're unhappy about the idea that it may not be as easy as it is now for them to do that. And so that y'all are actually the ones who are working on the less democratic side of this. How would you how would you respond to that?
Well, I can take it. So first off, I've heard the line that this move would make us the most pro-democracy city in the country. However, it doesn't seem progressive when we would be diminishing the voices of people. I mean, just like Emily said, right now we have 10 people that represent all parts of Austin coming together to make policy that represents everyone, no matter where you live in Austin. There are certain key issues in the city that are deep rooted, that by hoping that we elect somebody that can just fix these problems and just hope that, they say democracy works. Well, democracy is working right now. Democracy is working in the sense that if I lived in District 1, I'm not concerned about, somebody who has the most money in District 10 being able to wield power right away. I mean, there are certain checks and balances. And another thing is that realizing it's a lot easier to get rid of a bad hire than it is to get rid of a rogue mayor, because it can be a lot. I mean, we are not guaranteed the person to uphold our values that we would think are progressive. And if that's at the cost of what is believed to be democracy, well, that's not a risk that we should be willing to take. I mean, Austin's a very hot hub for a lot of big business coming in. And, let's just say, I know there was a joke around that, Elon Musk is coming here just to buy the city, the Iron Mare.
Our joke, yes.
That is a reality that we could possibly face, is that big money coming in. I mean, if we look at Austin for Progressive Reform's financial reports, I mean, it doesn't look like the community is buying into this all. It means a diverse coalition of both, Democrats, progressive, environmentalists saying that, this is not what's best for the city. So for us to think that for some reason our side is the anti-democratic and less progressive, well, let's take a look at what the people think in the city. The people don't want to be bought out by the biggest donor that comes and has the mayor's ear, no matter how many checks and balances you have. I mean, it's right now we have been able to keep corruption at bay by a 10-1 system. So we don't need to expand on this idea that somehow Prop F is going to be more progressive.
Emily?
I would just add that the claim, and from the perspective of our coalition, the claim that our groups are special interest groups, when you look at the parties who are behind Prop F, are people who historically have a great amount of access to political figures, to the mayor's office, as political donors, as folks with those relationships and access. And so again, when the groups that are part of by the people are organizations with membership bases. They are organizations that are accountable to people in the community, to their membership, whether workers or whether members like Workers' Defense Project, and that we are accountable to those individuals. And so the idea that that's not actually representative of people and perspectives by a broader coalition and people who don't historically have access to the halls of power in the same way. And so that's, I think, just a mischaracterization of who our organizations are, of what we stand for and what we've worked to do. And to the extent that we actually are doing work on the ground every year to expand democratic participation and electoral participation of communities of color. And so, yeah, I would push back that that's a mischaracterization.
All right. Nelson and Andrew, do you have any response to their response?
Andrew.
Sure, I'll go first. Thanks, Nelson. First of all, I want to point out, again, we mentioned at the top that the arguments would be anti-democratic against Prop F. And I want to point out the anti-democratic argument we just heard, which is that the council is better at hiring the chief executive than the people would be. We trust the people to choose the chief executive of the country. And that person oversees a massive budget, the military, departments that serve all of us, education, health, and the rest. But we choose a citizen to run that. And none of us wants to give that decision away to the Senate or the Congress of the United States. We should trust Austin voters to choose the right person. They're not going to be bought by big money interests. They're going to vote for who they believe is best suited to live our values. I also want to point out that our city is diverse. Our city is majority people of color. Our council is drawn from districts that are, a majority of council districts are majority white. The mayor's district, if it were a district, would be one of the most diverse in the city in terms of racial diversity and economic diversity. This would put more power in the hands of people and more representative power in the hands of people than currently exists on the council majority. Nico mentioned financial reports, and I just want to point out that the average donation for the group that Nico represents is $10,000 from 12 or so people, many of whom notoriously anti-city council Republicans in this city. So we should take a look at that as well. Our median donation is $100. Our average donation is 10% of the average donation of Nico's group. And then finally, and I think Nelson, better than anyone here, can speak to this, we should stop conflating Prop F with 10-1. 10-1 had nothing to do with the city manager system. It didn't change that at all. And I will pass the mic over to Nelson.
You know, what's ironic is when we talk about 10-1 and having access to your city council, I watched them hospital Chronicle, okay? I watched your Democratic city council go to the airport and hide in a bunker. If not for the press, we wouldn't even know about it. Now, I've been here a long time, and under every administration, when we hired a city manager, I had access, even under that large system. So your law about democracy does not pass to scrutiny. These people are more invested about that district, which is a major problem. For example, right now, the mayor is talking about the century-old racial issues in this city. He's going to our community, talking to folks one-on-one. I don't see anybody else but perhaps Madison. Now, think about a mayor who had the actual ability to make decisions about, look, we're going to address disparities with investment right away. He could do it. I don't see the other people talking about racial disparities. There are Black folks in their districts. So don't give me, look, in reality is, number one, we have serious issues in the city. We need the executive leadership that we elect to address those issues with council support. And I believe with a council that's actually involved in terms of writing bills, we can move some of these issues. But our mayor is making the right arguments, but I don't hear anybody else talking about it except for District 1. These are racial divisions right here under this system. That's why I think overall, I trust a voting anytime, regardless of zip code, to vote for the best candidate. And guess what? If you make a mistake, there's another election.
All right. So my next question for the pro-F side kind of tees up off of this. 10-1 is not even yet 10 years old. And after, 6 attempts to get a more representative council system, we finally got one. And isn't it just a fact that by going to a strong mayor system, which we, as you point out, we did not do in 10-1. We could have done strong mayor with 10-1, and we did not. Isn't that moving us backwards to a place where more power is in the hands of the at-large electorate that, dictated what the policies were going to be for people who were not wealthy and white and West Austinites. What is the chance under the strong mayor position, that someone from the Eastern Crescent is going to get elected mayor? So, who wants to start? Andrew or Nelson?
I'll start. I think the chances are great because right now in my community, we see the entire city. Like I said before, the most responsive person we talk to oftentimes is the mayor. Listen, we have people all over the city of different cultures, races, who are very informed, but they need a vehicle to carry the interest collectively. Right now, everything is based on district to district to district. You only see as far as your zip code. It's not going to work in the city going forward with the population. You've got to see the entire city and build viable coalitions so we can get votes, get things done. I'm worried about the central over disparities here for the folks who live in the city who've been displaced. For example, let's talk about District 1. We're in danger of losing an opportunity district. Nobody talks about that. All these democratic people, they don't talk about Black people who might not have a vote. We are. If you don't enhance the city council to additional district, reduce the size of each district, we're going to lose our majority in District 1. Is that important? I guess not. To me, it is. I don't fear taking political risks. We always have. I just believe in a mayor council system. It's going to force necessary dialogue, but you need a leader who has the ability to make decisive decisions and use political resources to address issues where they are. I'm very confident in folks I've talked to. They like that idea. So I don't have the fear syndrome. I think that number one, with accountable political leaderships, that person has the authority with our support as citizens to make the right decisions. I don't see a rogue. I look at these cities all across the country. I don't see a rogue in Seattle or Denver. We don't see that model. If you're going to talk about bad government, your current government here wasted $3 million on a website. So if you're going to be critically fair about this stuff, let's look at what people are doing with their money and decisions they're not making right. They can't do an equitable rollout in public health when people are dying. We got private organizations like Michael Lofton, Harvest Foundation that did it. 5,000 people didn't even have appointments, but they can't do it. Why? Because number one, they're indecisive. They're indecisive and they like meaningful leadership at critical times.
Andrew, you got anything to add?
Sure, I would just add to that. I completely agree, of course. And I just want to add that we should have faith in the voters of this city in a democracy. The last two citywide or countywide elections in Austin elected Delia Garza and Jose Garza as leaders, who no one would say is in the thrall of corporate interests or big money interests. We are a different city than we were even 15 years ago, and moving our elections to November and moving the mayor's election to presidential years and democracy dollars are only going to make us more democratic and progressive. And I think 10-1, which obviously we all support and moved our city forward in enormous ways, also exposed that the city manager system is still holding us back. We have seen so many votes taken by our 10-1 council that were unanimous or nearly unanimous, where the city management has not implemented it, delayed the implementation, or otherwise thwarted the will of our elected officials. We're talking about things like the Fair Chance Hiring Ordinance, which Ms. Timm mentioned earlier, which it took the media to uncover 2 years later was not being implemented properly by the executive branch. We're talking about marijuana decriminalization. The next day after that unanimous vote by the council, the police chief declared, I'm not going to enforce it. And then finally, we're talking about a unanimous vote back in June of last year, expressing no confidence in the police leadership in this city. We empowered council members to act in our name, and they did, and still what they asked for didn't happen. We should empower voters to choose the executive so that we can have democratically elected executives working with the council to make sure that the will of the Austin voter is done.
All right. Emily and Nico, I would say I'm going to let you respond, but actually Andrew just asked my next question for you, which is we have in the last 2 years seen these various examples that people point to of why having a city manager who doesn't have to do what the council says has led to a lot of frustration and pain in the city. So why wouldn't moving to a strong mayor system be an improvement on that.
So I agree that the city manager system has not been perfect. And I agree that there have been some frustrating moments around getting that enforcement. But I do believe that there are checks and balances within the city manager system, that there are, that ultimately they are accountable to the democratically elected council, which does always have the option to fire them and to direct their work. And that's something that may be easier to do than if there's a political disagreement with the mayor. And so where there would now be political appointees running city departments. And so there would be that similar problem would still exist with the mayor unless they were aligned with exactly what council passed. And so my concern around with a strong mayor running the city, would we see department heads become political appointees, essentially the mayor's cabinet? I think after 4 years of the Trump administration, we've seen the dangers of politicizing government agencies. Do we want to see a system where the mayor can put his cronies in charge of public health or public safety, or do we want to see those as professionals running our city services? And we also, you don't need to look much further than the governor's mansion to see how dangerous a concentration of executive power allowed the Public Utility Commission to cozy up to energy companies and fail to weatherize our power grid. And I've heard like other cities like Chicago pointed to as a model for strong mayor for Austin. And I think that there's concerns there. If you look at Rahm Emanuel, who covered up the murder by the police of 17-year-old Laquan McDonald, perfectly illustrates the details and the dangers of such a concentration of executive power. So the notion that a strong mayor would necessarily execute the will of council, which he may or may not agree with, because he may or may not represent the populations that those council members represent, is questionable to me at best, and not proven. And yes, yes, you can vote him out of office, but in some ways it may be easier to replace a city employee than to wait 4 years to elect a whole new mayor because he's failed to implement the policies and the will of council. And in the meantime, those policies will languish.
Nico?
Well, I would just add, and I would ask the question of, again, we keep going back to this of, well, let's just elect this chief executive, again, with this overall arching hope that said person is going to make all these wishes come true. Why aren't we talking to our city council, which we have direct access to because they are actually a part of our neighborhoods? It's a lot easier, like Emily said, to get rid of a bad hire. And so the ongoing narrative that somehow we will be able to move forward and just take the risk. Anyone, when we look at, especially when it comes to the issue of like race, I mean, what we saw this past summer, those that we have lost died underneath strong mayor forms of government. So, there is no guarantee here. And to think, why not make our current system better than trying to overhaul it? And again, you can draw the conclusions that you want, but it seems like it's, like we mentioned at the beginning, certain pockets of people, again, by a privatized campaign, again, not public. They did not go to city council to try and get a community task force going. They pulled together the people in the room that they think would be better at deciding what's best for all people. And here we are today. And just to conclude really quick, Austin for All People is not a PAC. So I would love to know where our financial report is because we can't accept money, but definitely just want to throw that out there.
All right.
Thank you.
Andrew Nelson, you have any response to that before I ask a question?
Look,
Sure. A few quick
I'm
responses.
flabbergasted. Frankly, police death, really? I was lately in 2000. You ever heard of Sophia King, Jesse Owens, Daniel Roca, Kevin Brown, Devin Contreras, Byron Carter Jr., Amit Bradley, Larry Jackson Jr., David Joseph, and others right here in Austin, Texas. It's really sad that you guys talk about a George Floyd death. It happened right here, and we talk about them all the time, but nobody from the council even got involved. And by the way, I know all of them, most of them. When I talk to them, I don't get responses. They have other concerns. We want accountability. Yeah, all these deaths here in Austin, Texas, Black and brown people, you don't need a George Floyd example. You have it on national TV. That's good, I guess, but you have your own cases right here. You know what? It took a federal investigation that we initiated to come in and say, look, fix your department. Have they fixed it? We're having the same conversation. It's called ineffective governance. And knowledge of history will tell you that. That's all we're saying. There are better ways around the city. And that's my political philosophy. I believe that. But I'm also willing to work for it in our communities by educating people, assisting people, as I always do. I don't need to sit at the table. I want to make sure our community is being heard so we can have an equal quality of life in the city, because Austin deserves that.
Andrew?
Thank you. And I would add to that only that the opposition will use the example of our former president. And I would say that our response to the last 4 years has not been to take away the right to vote for president. It has been to expand democracy and fight for the right to vote and access to the ballot and make sure we turn out more people. The other side mentioned cronyism. And I'll point out that our current city manager came to town, asked for the resignations of the top leaders of the city, and put into place as top deputy a coworker from Minneapolis. We're going to have turnover in either situation. I'd rather vote for the person doing the turnover than not have a vote for that person. The other side mentioned Chicago, and I'll point out, first of all, that 2/3 of the large cities in this country use the strong mayor system, but the focus is always from the opposition on Chicago. I'm not going to demagogue Chicago. I think that's what Republicans do for a variety of reasons, frankly, that are unsavory. And I'll point out, too, that Rahm Emanuel was chased out of town practically by the voters of that city and replaced with Lori Lightfoot in Chicago. So the democracy does work when mayors screw up. And finally, no one's promising guarantees here. No one's saying that our systems and problems are going to be fixed overnight. But we are saying that we're better off when voters get to choose who leads us, as opposed to a small group of politicians choosing the person who's going to lead our city. And I'm not sure about the point that Nico made regarding PACs. On the website for his group, it says that the PAC's top 5 donors lead with Cumbie Development, which is redeveloping our graffiti park into condos, delivering $50,000 to this organization. The International City Manager Association in Washington, D.C., $13,500. And someone who sent an email saying that she can't wait to turn over the city council in 2022 and elect conservatives, delivering $10,000. So it is a PAC. They have a report. It is public. I encourage people to go look at folks whose average donation is $10,000 on that PAC.
All right, we're gonna stop there for that. I just want to point out that the International City and County Manager Association is led by Austin's former city manager, Mark Ott, just as a factoid. This is getting us very close to the end, so I am going to go ahead and invite closing statements from both sides, and I'm going to go with with Emily and Nico first. So, Emily, are you ready?
Sure. I feel the need to reiterate that the mayor is the least representative actor on our council in terms of being accountable to communities of color, to working people. And someone mentioned before, like, what's the likelihood of seeing someone elected from the Eastern Crescent getting elected as mayor? I want to see that happen. I want to envision that. I think that that there will be some major challenges. And again, I just recall the days of prior to 10-1, and Austin has changed, but has it changed that much, where you really couldn't run for that at-large position if you didn't have some serious buy-in and support from the Downtown Austin Alliance, from the business community, and from some serious donor money. And add that to the fact that our campaign finance system allows candidates to opt out of finance caps, and the fix is being touted as the Democracy Dollars program, which would be great, but is currently in its form that it's on the ballot is missing a spending cap. And so individuals would be able to, yes, get public funds, but then also pour as much of their own money into a statewide mayoral election as they want to, which will continue to prioritize people who are independently wealthy and able to run. So I think the key takeaway for us is that this is not going to make our city more democratic. And I think also the way that it was done, that it was rushed through by a group of wealthy donors and corporate interests, a so-called stakeholder process that happened during a pandemic, during the most contentious election of our lifetimes, and left out many groups that should have been at the table. As Nico mentioned, this was not a publicly commissioned charter review like they've done in the past. Why couldn't we have had a more public in a more deliberative process to develop such a proposal for such a big change in our government. I have major concerns about how that's happening and how this is also being put on a May election as a supposed democratic reform that's committed to expanding the electorate, a May election, that a special election that has historically low turnout. Why should such a big decision be made by such a minority of participants who tend to be a more politically elite engaged group? That does not sound like democratic reform to me. So at the end of the day, we believe that the strong mayor proposal, as it is being proposed right now, the way it is being proposed right now, will concentrate power in the hands of an individual who is more accountable to a wealthy elite and to corporate interests, and minimize the power and the accountability that we have built over the years since the 10-1 system was implemented, that is making our council more reactive and more proactive and more responsive to the needs of communities of color, working people in Texas, and making sure that those voices have a place where their priorities are really lifted up and elevated at city council. And so we encourage voters to oppose Proposition F. We believe that we need to consider these sort of questions in a more deliberative and public way and not a rushed charter amendment, and that this is critical to the functioning of our government. And we stand to lose a lot of power that has been built for working people and accountability for working people and people of color in this city over the past 5 years.
Nico, do you have anything to add to that?
I would just say, again, reiterating everything Emily just said, trust our current system, because when we have 10 people coming to bat on a dais, it's a lot better than the consolidation of power that is going to happen with Proposition F. We need to be able to make sure that people that we put into office, that we trust to make decisions on our behalf, to vet somebody that can run a city, to make sure that all the wishes that we want in the city are going to be executed. We hold them accountable, because that is how we know each voice is going to be heard. I mean, when you they package all their amendments together to say this is going to only benefit the strong mayor. First of all, like Emily said, May election, low voter turnout, but then moving this mayor election to a presidential year, and we know how crowded that is. I mean, we talk about representation. Who is more likely to run in a presidential year if they're going to be mayor? And so it's all snake oil compared to what they want here, which is to hold on to power for a small group of political elites. And that's exactly what Prop F is.
All right. So last word, Nelson and Andrew, who goes first?
I came to this city in 1981 as a veteran and a student. I remember when Ron Mullen was mayor. I've watched the city, I've studied the city. I've been primarily involved in the Black community. Right now, this morning, I'm on 12th Street, a few blocks from I-35, and I see that this entire neighborhood has changed based on gentrification. We haven't even addressed it. We didn't even talk about it. The question to me was, can this city do better as a city? Yes, resoundingly, yes, it can. But we have to ask the right questions and take a little risk. Number one, it could be better managed, especially in times of crises. Right now, we're talking about the water department. They didn't prepare for the winter storm. Really? You didn't see the storm coming? Where was our city council? They didn't ask any questions. You can't blame the state for all of that. The issues are right here. What I'm saying right now is in this city, we're seeing infrastructure here that's 40 years old. So you wonder why apartment complexes do this gas and you can't repair the gas line? Well, you haven't checked it. Here's what we're saying. Despite our challenges, this is a very resourceful city. We're not taking advantage of it the correct way. We need to have decisive leadership with buy-in from the entire city that can make decisions based on a consensus and communication process. I think if we did that, the city could go even higher. And finally, as far as representation, we can elect Black and brown people in this city. I think it's going to be enhanced under the new system, I believe, because it's going to force more communication, more accountability, and more responsibility. When you expand democracy, you create more opportunities. And what city better than Austin, Texas, to be an example of how to address the wage gap, the housing crisis, the homelessness problem in the city? Do you like what things are? The homeless population? We can do better, a lot better. And the police issue, 20 years to figure this stuff out. because of a national situation? The answers are right here. Read the reports, study your city, go across geographical lines and talk to everybody and form a consensus on what's best for everybody. Then elect somebody who has the ability, the credibility, and also the track record of addressing these issues. There are plenty of folks in the city that can run the city on the strong merit system. I'm not afraid of that. And by the way, I want to thank the fourth branch of government, the press. The press does a good job of bringing out things that we don't even think about. I tell all my members, read the Chronicle, read all these papers, because if you read what they're saying, they're out of front on most issues. We have the checks and balances. We need change, we need results. Don't be afraid of change, because by expanding democracy, you're going to enhance the voice of the people. And I believe in the people, not necessarily the politicians.
All right. Andrew, do you have anything to add?
No, thank you.
All right. Thank you all for all you do for Austin and all that you're doing to make sure that we do have our democracy as vital as possible leading up to the May 1st election. Again, early voting runs from April 19th through 27th, and election day is Saturday, May 1st. You can find out everything you need to know before you go to the polls at austinchronicle.com/elections. I'm Mike Clark-Madison. Thank you for watching.